Hi, my name's Bob Greenyer, and welcome to The Secret of Cold War Technology, Understanding True Charge Separation. I'm a volunteer with the Martin Fleischmann Memorial Project, and this is the 16th of October 2022. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. Right. In theory, the camera should work, so can you see me? Okay, if anyone has this happen again, if there was a delay to the start of the stream, the reason was that YouTube streaming software in the web browser needed to be reinitiated. That was it. That was it. That was 45 minutes delay. So I'm very sorry, but we know that for next time. Excellent. All right. So, I wanted to take a week off, but I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle the week off, so I took off my week off. I caved on Friday, and I started looking at a document that was shared with me many moons ago by, I think it's a guy who goes by the name of Master Evo on YouTube. I don't know. He has a handle, Marty Searle, that I think he was using. I don't know. Anyway, he said that some of the things that I was saying that we were observing, and my inferences and my sort of suggestions for explaining what was going on, were similar to some things that were being discussed by a guy who was reviewing the work of a number of different authors, including one Nikola Tesla. And he had produced this book that the frame is partially derived from, that you see here. And it was called Secrets of Cold War Technology. And I have the full book frame here. And hopefully you've been able to look at it. I've actually gone to the trouble of purchasing a copy of this from the second-hand market. It cost $160, so that was a bit of pill to swallow, but sometimes it's nice to have these things in your hand and look at them over a period of time, and go over and think about these things over and over again. But it's by Jerry Vassileitos, and I have this thing where I kind of like to clean room research. I still haven't read E.V. A Tale of Discovery by Ken Shoulders, his 1986-1987 book, following his study of John Hutchison's work. But by clean room, what do I mean? I mean, I kind of don't want to read what someone else has already concluded before I start doing research and look at the empirical data and trying to rationalize how that could have possibly occurred. And then throw what I think is valuable out there, see if there's any, thoughts about that, and then sort of build from there. So whilst I was sent this way back, I think at the beginning of February, or certainly the beginning of 2020, I kind of looked at the title and I thought, well, there's a lot of sensationalist stories out there about HARP particularly. So I thought, well, maybe when I've got a bit of free time at some point in the future, I will take a look at this. And that time was Friday evening. Now, funnily enough, I haven't even read the pages that I was suggesting you read. I got to page, let's put it like this, 69. I got to page yin yang before I pulled the plug on my preparation for our little chit chat tonight. And I think there's enough in there to talk about to certainly do the remaining time I have for you tonight. So Harry is apologising because he only got to page 70, so you and I got to the same point. So that is quite fun. Anyway, I will actually go to the first comment here, What I do when I feel that the universe is telling me to do something, I will just go, right. I'm just going to leave it to chance. I'll flip through the document and I'll just read the first thing that happens to the stars align, and I literally couldn't believe it. I flipped to this page. I don't even know what page it is now offhand, and there it is. It's page 173, and I started reading the top of that for the first full paragraph, first full sentence. And it says, the impulse singularity was only part of his process, however. The separation of charge carriers from etheric components being the critical factor. Well, this was unbelievably shocking to me. And I thought, who's this talking about? And it's going, I went back into the previous page. Dr. Tesla caught that effect. Sorry, Dr. Tesla thought, I guess I should say, that effective conservation of the effect relied on conservation of the impulse energy. The impulse singularity was only part of the process, however, the separation of charge carriers from etheric components being the critical factor. And it immediately dawned on me that this is exactly the conclusion that I'd come to over these many years, and that I presented in Azizi this past September. And of course I talked about it before in my monopole clutch video, and I'd also specifically with how HHO works and how the PAP engine works and how Lena works in general. But I have to say, quite a bit of that came from seeing my first strange radiation in 2017 coming out of the ultrasonically treated fuel of Suhas Ralkar, and then later that year in late September, indelibly marked on the core of the Lion 1 core copper oxide incrustation. And so that kind of gave me this kind of view that, okay, this strange radiation stuff is real. Perhaps I should really pay attention to those people that are discussing it and what can we learn from that. And I encourage you to methodically sit down with that last Russian conference from last week. The Russian to English translation pair in the auto captioning is actually pretty good. But what you have to understand is that many of those scientists that are there, they were working on the Soviet Cold War technology. And when I was reading through this document here, it became abundantly clear that not only were their technologies based on what Tesla saw as etheric flow, etheric energy, whatever that is, this ether, whatever it is, these microscopic corpuscles, as he called it, but that the things that they had observed, that John Hutchison observed, who was actually trying to build Tesla devices and replicate some of the things he did, and particularly with this disruptive discharge generator, and the solutions that they were providing, and also the things that we've seen in Vega experiments and other experiments, are exactly this. And moreover, I think we have a very full and coherent and consistent understanding emerging. And I didn't quite get when Rutschev followed up my talk and my supplemental talk on extreme interactions. It was one of those moments where you think, has this all been worth it? Because he said, I think with what Bob has shown here, we are at the stage of reimagining physics, and it was a deep honor to hear that coming from him. But this is a collective work. It would not have been possible with themselves and the many researchers that have contributed to this project we are literally talking about the wheel work of nature. And when in my Azizi presentation, I talked about this charge separation thing. And if you can imagine that fractal toroid structure, that if you imagine that in your head, this wheel within a wheel within a wheel ad infinitum, this red thing that I've showed you so many times, if you can imagine that is transparent, and that is the shell within which you have the nucleus and around which you have electrons. It isn't quite like that, but it appears like that, it would seem, when it comes out of atoms and it clusters. That is the radiant energy. And I think that will be very clear as we read through this document. That is the radiant energy and clusters thereof. It is most likely relic neutrino condensates or ultra low energy neutrino condensates. What are the two difference? What is the difference between those? Cold neutrino or ultra low energy neutrinos? Well, I've said before, there are nuclear neutrinos which are relativistic, have very low mass and or zero mass, and do not interact with ordinary matter. There is the other type, which is left over in theory from the birth of the universe, but they could continually be produced by supernova, by energetic events, by suns within the universe. So it doesn't necessarily need a big bang. But in the cosmos, they are at about, I think, 2.7 Kelvin. They are a coherent condensate. And when it comes to suns, if you look at Space Earth Human from Alexander Parkhomov, he says that the sun does produce these things, and in fact any hot body does, over 1,000 Kelvin, because of the 5 eV you need to create a neutrino and antineutrino cold neutrino pairs. The problem is that the kinetic speed of those is not fast enough to escape the sun's gravitational well. So you kind of really get a flux of those from the sun, and I think something like 2 or 3%, I can't remember offhand, it's something like that, of the neutrinos coming from the sun are in this category. And you might imagine that they escape because they go through solar flares or prominences or whatever. They're not a general flux, and they actually participate in the nuclear reactions going on in the sun. Now, there is a concept that Alexander Parkhomov talks about, and that is neutrino spheres. And there are neutrino spheres around every gravitational body. This is because they are pulling these things towards them, and out of a coherent condensate, you can actually have areas of a condensate where there is more of the same thing, of the same wave function that's everywhere. It's just a higher density of, it's a little bit weird to think about it. You get this thing going on. There's a higher flux of them, and there's a neutrino sphere around the Earth, around the Moon, around the Sun, and indeed all gravitational bodies in the cosmos. Now, effectively, and I will be translating the Shishkin papers and his colleagues, and it's actually Shishkin and Dubovik, is just crazy, and other people that worked at Dumna during those Cold War era period. And what he talks about is, he has this paper called Where is the Atom Battery? Now, I've talked about in the past my first question about Earth came to me when I was about 5 years old. I was reading an Encyclopedia Britannica, and it was, why are the elements on Earth in the places they are? Well, I think I believe I've answered that, certainly to my own satisfaction. So that question is out of the window. But there's a question that came to me much, much later. It's this idea that, on the one hand, people say there's no perpetuum mobile. You can't have a system continually operating forever, And then you have the fact that electrons are always supposedly spinning or orbiting around a nuclei. How does that occur? What keeps that going? And Shishkin et al., they propose that there is this interplay between the nucleus, the electrons, and this flux of relic neutrinos, and they come in from the cosmos into the atom, and they push into the nucleus and out and in and out, and they create this shell. I think it's Corollas, this shell model of the atom. And like I say, I will talk about these more once I've done the translations, because they're important for the papers that I'll be writing for the two conferences. Essentially, the way I visualize this, having read Parkhomov's work, is that the nucleus, you can imagine the nucleus of an atom is like the Earth, or it's like the Moon, or like the Sun. These are different sized gravitational bodies, and they pull in a cluster of relic neutrinos, which are extremely small, and they form a neutrino sphere around the nucleus. Now, what is true charge separation? It is the secret, in my view, of Cold War technology. It is the secret of all of these novel technologies that have been observed since. And given that, and given what it can do, you can understand why they would do anything they possibly can to avoid this from being understood. But I believe that you guys will have the ability to implicitly understand this is what is happening in all of these exotic technologies, all of them. And you will understand that we need to respect it. This is the great power. This is the great power. Those that know that they have great power but choose not to use it will inherit the earth. That is the true meaning of the meek shall inherit the earth. And so we do need to respect it. And if you push it too far, it will basically convert matter to light and leptons. And I have a different take on that. Now, this is because I like to explore ideas with you rather than in conferences. I'm going to say right now that some things that you'll read in this book, you will easily be able to explain. Some things that you've seen me talk about with ball lightning, it's easily understood. So I'll give you one example. Take this ring on my finger. There are examples spanning hundreds of years where a ball lightning will come into the presence of someone, the ball comes down and it contacts the ring, and the ring literally disappears. It disappears. It dematerializes. Okay? Now, we know that gold and silver and copper all have spin nuclei, but they are all diamagnetic. Okay? Unlike aluminium, which is paramagnetic. This is very important. I will come on to that later. Okay. So they resist the destruction of this, but they are conductive. And so the electrons, the free electrons on the surface of this conductor, will excite these neutral clusters that are in the ball lightning, that are in this coherent structure, that are in these etheric rays, these Tesla type, what he called radiant energy. So when the ball lightning comes down, it starts pouring these things into the metal. And beyond a certain threshold, it's not just interacting with spin nuclei and the spin of electrons and the spin of protons. Even if you had material that, for instance, does not have spin nuclei, obviously carbon, for instance, carbon-12, it doesn't have spin nuclei. It has still electrons, but the quarks have spin. And so when you get above a certain threshold, this starts going subnuclear and it rips the matter apart. So you can produce electrons, you can start transmuting, you can turn things to jelly, you can do these various levels, but when you get to a certain intensity of these fractal toroidal structures, then not only is the Coulomb barrier not a barrier at all, it doesn't care about these things at all. The toroidal moment goes straight to the spin of the nucleus. It does not care about Coulomb barrier. Forget it, it's not important, okay? it goes straight to the nucleus. Above a certain intensity, it does not care about the nuclei. It goes straight to the quarks, and it rips the matter apart. When you decay matter at that level, you start producing light and leptons. So I've taken it one step further here. Okay? So you can understand why they did not want this available. And it is clear from the 1890s that people knew, if they had watched Tesla do some of the demonstrations that are attributed to him in here, you would know that they would do everything in their power to make sure people were taught electrodynamics that would not allow them to consider these possibilities. You would do that because you couldn't trust people with the great power. And I believe that I think it's Khrushchev and whoever was the US president at the time, I don't know, it's in Tom Bearden's books. They made this agreement, I think in the early 1970s, I think it was something like 1973, that this technology is so formidable that they supposedly agreed that no one would develop it. Well, clearly they have. And all next generation technology of warfare will be based on this. And that's why they don't care about leaving rubbish weapons everywhere. That's why they don't care. It's like a fire sale. Let's get rid of all the rest of the weapons. Let's sell them to anyone that will buy them, because they're completely and utterly useless in the face of this technology. But we will destroy the Earth. Maybe just remove it from its magnetic coupling. Have a spin on the crust around the core. There's great risks with overuse of this technology. Great risks. Maybe it was because of this use of this technology in a way for humanitarian good or for a technological society in the past that ended up by causing, I don't know, the Great Flood. I don't know. But clearly it needs to be respected. And if you push it too far, it will destroy matter. There is nothing that will stop that. And you see that in our experiments. Okay? So, that is essentially, what I wanted to say tonight in terms of the secret of Cold War technology is understanding true charge separation. And so let's go back to that phrase here. The impulse singularity was only part of the process, however. The separation of charge carriers from etheric components being the critical factor. Okay? Now, as I said in my presentation, Parkhomov is lensing these things using metal reflectors into samples, concentrating the natural flux of these into beta isotopes and causing transmutation. Okay? Inverse beta decay. But you can technologically produce these. And you will see in the writings of Shishkin that they can be produced by impinging gamma rays on things. So the gamma ray is energetic enough that it can interact with atoms and punch out their nucleus, removing the electrons, and you end up with releasing the strange radiation, the string vortex solitons, these black evos, these various names that these have been given, or radiant energy. And these things interact with each other and cluster together, okay? And they become coherent because the Aharonov bomb effect, as I argue, is related to the toroidal moment. And so they can become in phase with each other and coherent. They self-cohere. So you can load these things, you load these things and load these things into a metal, like that ring is being loaded by the ball lightning, until it cannot exist as ordinary matter anymore. There's too much excitation from the free electrons in the metal lattice. It's spinning it up, getting it really going. That ends up by creating a bigger toroidal moment intensity, it does more coherence, and bang, it's gone, right? And it's literally, you get to a threshold and then it's bye-bye whatever it is you're trying to disappear, okay? So you can get these things from the cosmos. You can synthesize them by taking metal over 1,000 degrees or in any environment. And you can also by any form of shock. And I detailed this in my Azizi presentation. It was difficult to be up there and saying these things and thinking, well, you know, I'm kind of out on a limb here. I'm basing my understanding on, you know, what I've experienced, what I've shown. Then I've cross-correlated it to things that have been observed in the past. Then I found that the Russians have been talking about these things, and it also explains the Hutchison effects and Ken Shoulders. But I've never gone back to source. I've never gone back to Tesla. And when I say source, one of the most recent people to have rediscovered this universal fact of nature. Okay. So let's have, without much further ado, let's have a look through. What I've done is I've gone through the document and I've just highlighted a few pages up to page 69, other than that phrase, which I piqued my interest. So where did, is there anyone got any quick questions at this point before I start going into this analysis here? This probably, for me, is a seminal moment. I mean, it's one thing to have your physical observations verified by historical observation and by mathematical representations, and to try and correlate all these different invented terms by various people. But what you're going to see here is either knowingly or unknowingly that pretty much all of the technologies are rediscoveries of things that Tesla observed. Now, to be fair, Tesla, you know, he was discovering these things before the discovery of X-rays and the electron. Okay, no one had discovered a neutron, so he's making all these observations from empirical data before any of these things have even been observed. You know, so it's amazing. And he was relying on, you know, the qualitative data. What am I actually seeing? What am I seeing? And what does it mean? What is what I'm looking at telling me? And I can tell you that that is the way to do science. That is the way to do science. Look, see what happened, and then think and think and think and talk about it. Talk about it with people, because it's that intuitive aspect of realization. We're not discovering anything. We are realizing how the universe works. It is not a discovery. We cannot own this. Tesla could not own this. It's too big for any species. It's too big. We must respect it. It is the God's toolbox. Okay. So, any questions? There's various names for it. Yeah, so one of the papers I shared was ultra-low momentum neutrinos. Yes. So you need to create... So Gordon Doherty is asking, does one ultra-low momentum neutrinos cause coherence? No. Well, you kind of want to create a structure that has this toroidal moment, okay? And a spinning electron vortice, where through its toroidal moment will interact with these particles that can only be interacted with through their toroidal moment. And then they will organize them in their own likeness. And then the charge can go away. And then you have this superfluid vortical structure that persists for a very long period of time. And it can be re-excited into something that can do work. So this is the white EVO, the black EVO transition. But the framework on which the atom is built, the framework on which the exotic vacuum object is built, is this ether, this, in my understanding, relic neutrino. It can be other dark matter, but you know, this aspect of dark matter can explain, in my view, gravity, And actually, I was shocked at just the last few pages that I got to up to 69. We're talking about this push mode of gravity, and that Tesla saw that this was creating, the heat in the Earth. Now he does at one point say that in certain metals, allow the radiant energy to synthesize electrons, and I can buy that completely. But he doesn't go, at least I haven't read that far, maybe it does say this before we get to the end. I mean, heat is energy, so if it's generating heat in the Earth, is it just like kinetic heat? I am arguing very specifically that it is creating matter, and we are witnessing how it creates matter, and that allows for the aggregation of the energy and even potentially the particles themselves into mass that allow for the expansion of the Earth that Constantin Mail refers to. And I go one step further, that this provides a well, because this whole pressure environment in the whole universe is attracted to a depressurization ahead of it caused by the condensation of the relic neutrinos into ordinary matter inside otherwise called gravitational bodies. And so that is the gravitational well. It's like there is a pull on a piston when dry steam goes to a liquid. It pulls the piston, yeah? And so if you can imagine it like that the piston is the rest of the relic neutrinos, and the condensation of the steam to the liquid, the water, produces this vacuum. That is a depressurization, and that pulls in the relic neutrinos of the piston, if you know what I mean, to conceptualize it in that way. Okay. Okay, Ken, yes, on the bagel winder project, we'll get to that in a different thing. There's some more developments on that. Yes, Cosmic Dave, it is an attractor beam, and I will reference something in this document up to page 69 that refers to that. Ron Muckle, yes, you're right. Maybe, Stephen, certainly in the view of Matsumoto, he's saying that the hytonic cluster is bound between a neutrino, it's a positron and electron bound by a neutrino. He doesn't specify relic neutrinos, and I have news on that. I may be going to Japan, and I may be working a little bit more with Mr. Omaza, and meeting one Dr. Matsumoto, because as of Wednesday this week, you are allowed to travel to Japan. All you need is a PCR test. So that is on. There's some significant costs involved with that, and we need to find a way around that. There's a lot of very interesting things. So the team has been put on high alert and is working hard at finding solutions to being able to conduct various experiments that one might imagine we need to conduct. Let's put it like that. And so this is very, very exciting. And so I hope to be able to conduct experiments with both Omaza and Dr. Matsumoto in place, in situ, and to discuss these various concepts with them. So I'm unbelievably excited about this. But I think this is all coming together rather nicely. So, all right, what else do we have? Yes, well, I will certainly be sharing videos and stuff on that. I will do whatever I can. It's difficult sometimes in other countries to get decent internet. You can see it's a challenge sometimes here when you already know you have it. Okay, so right, so let's start going through this. I almost found every other paragraph very shocking in this, and I'll maybe explain why. And these are just my initial thoughts, having read it on Friday and been doing family stuff in between. So there will be a lot more that come out of this. And I very much encourage you to look at the Russian conferences, Russian conference, think about what they're saying, internalize it, look at what we've spoken about over the years, and look at this text and think about what is being said, and fire away with your comments and questions on remoteview.icu, and I will work through this. I think we are really at a moment in history here. Okay, so after completing his initial work in polyphase and high-frequency alternating currents, Tesla made a singular discovery which forever altered the course and nature of his experimental research. Whether purposefully or inadvertently, this singular discovery has been completely overlooked even by those who claim to know his work best. No, it hasn't, but anyway. I think a lot of people looked at it seriously. A single article and statements made in several of his lectures absolutely affirm the conviction that Tesla, while working with violently abrupt electrical discharges, discovered a new force. So, disruptive discharges. The abrupt sparks, which he termed disruptive discharges, and I did a video on that when I didn't know almost anything about Tesla, but it became very clear to me that that was important, and in discussions with John Hutchison, he said it was very, very important to make a disruptive discharger in order to affect the Hutchison effect. Were found capable of exploding wires into vapor. They propelled very sharp shock waves. Now, I'm going to stop there. Exploding wires into vapor. Exploding wire experiments went an Irion in the 1920s, a long time behind Tesla. But ball lightning is known to have done this. Now, the most recent one, which has a huge amount of significance, was the 2000-2001 work by Leonid Orytsev. What was he doing? He was exploding wires. What did he find? Strange radiation, plasmoids, magnetic charges, and ball lightning. All in the same experiment. They are the same thing. There is not a shadow of a doubt left in my mind. They propelled very sharp shockwaves which struck him with great force across the whole front of his body. Of this surprising physical effect, Tesla was exceedingly intrigued, rather like gunshots of extraordinary power than electrical sparks. Tesla was completely absorbed with this new study. Electrical impulses produced effects commonly associated only with lightning. The explosive effects reminded him of similar occurrences observed with high-voltage DC generators, a familiar experience among workers and engineers. The simple closing of a switch on a high-voltage dynamo often brought a sting shock, the assumed result of residual static charging. It is a little bit about that, but John Hutchison often talked about these big DC battery arrays for powering submarines, and when they threw the switch on those, they had things like metal spanners would disappear. I mean, they would disappear. They were there and now they weren't. So, same thing about the ring, yeah? Same thing about the ring. Okay. So here we go. This is the next one, which is on page 27. Tesla knew that the strange supercharging effect was only observed at the very instant in which dynamos were applied to wire lines, just as in his explosive capacitor discharges. Right, I've got a note here, and this is referring to the 2006 Orytsev Chernobyl explanation. His explanation, which I gave in my Azizi 2021 presentation, was due to the turbine in reactor 4. It was being held, and when they re-engaged it, this caused an incredible surge of magnetic monopoles that were then bound to the oxygen dissolved in the water of the cooling lines. This went round, and Orytsev visited Chernobyl with other teams, and they physically saw these things, these metal things, which looked like they were carrying a huge magnetic current, being thrown off the walls, and different things distorted in a way that could only be explained by intense magnetic fields. And that was the cause of Chernobyl. As much as I like the HBO documentary, I do not believe it for a second. Okay? There is another explanation put forward by Tom Bearden, and that is that the Duga array, which is 4 kilometers away from the reactor 4, which is the closer reactor, was exercising, effectively charging the San Andreas fault. And Tom Bearden was called in. They created a phase conjugate array to beam the energy back to its source, and that caused effectively charge clusters. So whichever way you look at it, it's charge clusters. It doesn't matter which version of this story you're looking at, but it isn't the beautiful HBO documentary explanation. Sorry, as beautiful as that television is, and it's one of my favorite pieces of television that's been made in the last 20 or 30 years. Okay. So, though 2 instances were completely different, they had both produced the very same effects. The instantaneous surge applied by dynamos briefly appeared super concentrated in long lines. Tesla calculated that this electrostatic concentration was several orders in magnitude greater than any voltage which the dynamo could supply. The actual supply was somehow being amplified or transformed, but how? Also, this kind of like discharging, you might call from an inductor, is what's going on in Parkhomov's woodpecker device, creating the disruptive discharges in that very, very simple device, which produces strange radiation. Okay. Like slapping water with a rapid hand, the surface seemed solid. So it was with the electrical force, charges meeting up against a seemingly solid wall, but the effect lasted only as long as the impact. So my note here is impedance change. So this is something that Ken Shoulders would talk about, you know, these things when they interact. But actually what he's talking about here is how they create these things. He says these things only occur when, like, if you get your hand and you slap it onto water and you continue going, you feel the initial impedance change, but then when you're going through the water, it's not so hurt. It doesn't hurt you so much, and this is it's the initial punch that causes this charge separation that I'm talking about, that Shishkin and others are referring to in the papers you will see translated. And this is what causes the proton to go one way, the electron to go the other way, and the shell thing to come out, this radiant energy particle. Okay. And then once you're continually discharging through that made stream, you don't have this effect, which is why you need to pulse. A brief supercharging effect could be expected until charges were distributed. The dynamo itself thus became the brief scene of a minor shockwave. He began wondering why it was possible for electrostatic fields to move more quickly than the actual charge themselves, a perplexing mystery. Okay, it might seem a bit disjointed, but you can go and read it in your own time, and it will make sense. So this is, I say, note here, unidirectional pulse. Here was an effect demanding a single unidirectional superpulse. Right. So what is happening in the Vega experiments is, initially it was just a Cockcroft-Walton, which is obviously a unidirectional pulse, but then Henk Uren added a DC bias, which goes 2, 4, 6, 800 volts or whatever, something like that. And so this biases the thing. So you've got an electric field bias, and then you hit it with the Cockcroft-Walton, and that produces the shock wave. Okay. Here was an effect demanding a single unidirectional superpulse, with both the oscillations and alternations eliminated. New and strange effects began making their appearance. These powerful and penetrating phenomena were never observed when working with high-frequency alternations. The sudden quick closure of the switch now brought a penetrating shockwave through the laboratory, one which could be felt both as a sharp pressure and a penetrating electrical irritation, a sting. This is what is in anecdotes in the work of Eagley and all the way back hundreds of years, in ball lightning, particularly when a ball lightning explodes. You get a sting. Face and hands were especially sensitive to the explosive shock waves, which also produced a curious stinging effect at close range. Tesla believed that material particles approaching the vapor state were literally thrust out of the wires in all directions. Well, that was proved by Ritskev. In order to better study these effects, he poised himself behind a glass shield and resumed the study. Despite the shield, both shockwaves and stinging effects were felt by the now mystified Tesla. Goes through glass. This anomaly provoked a curiosity of the very deepest kind, for such a thing was never before observed. More powerful and penetrating than the mere electrostatic charging of metals, this phenomenon literally propelled high-voltage charge out to the surrounding space, where it was felt as a stinging sensation. The stings lasting for a small fraction of a second, the instant of switch closure. But Tesla believed that these strange effects were a simple effect of ionized shockwaves in the air, rather like strongly ionized thunderclap. Okay, so we go on. Tesla shielded himself with several materials. The arrangement of rapidly interrupted high-voltage direct currents resulted in the radiation of stinging rays which could be felt at great distances from their super-sparking source. In fact, Tesla felt the stings right through the shields. Whatever had been realized from the wires during the instance of switch closure successfully penetrated the shields of glass and of copper. It made no difference. The effect permeated each substance as if the shield were not there at all. Here was an electrical effect which communicated directly through space without material connections. Radiant electricity. In these several new observations, the phenomena was violating electrostatic charge principles experimentally established by Faraday. Now, this phrase here is almost similar to the one of Ken Shoulders when he says, like, fundamental violation, nasty violation of, man-made laws. Projected electrostatic charges normally spread out over the surface of a metallic shield. They do not penetrate metal. This effect had certain very non-electrical characteristics. Okay, these are neutral, and they are stinging when they go into the body, which means when they go into the body, they're somehow interacting with things in the body. What could they be interacting in the body with? Well, we're mostly water and carbon. In one case, Joseph Henry observed the magnetization of steel needles by a heavy spark discharge. So he was trying to explain what he observed, and so he went looking. He says Tesla was truly mystified by this strange new phenomenon and searched the literature for references to its characteristics. No such references was found except the surreptitious observations of two experimenters. In one case, Joseph Henry observed the magnetization of steel is non-magnetic material, by a heavy spark discharge. This is what John Hutchison observed. The extraordinary feature of this observation in 1842 lay in the fact that the Leyden jar, whose spark apparently produced the magnetization, stood on the upper floor of an otherwise electrically impervious building. Brick walls, thick oak doors, heavy stone and iron flooring, tin ceilings. Moreover, the steel needles were housed in a vault in the cellar. How did the spark affect such a charge through such a natural barrier? Dr. Henry believed that the spark had released special light-like rays, and these were the penetrating agencies responsible for the magnetization. He was right. A second such account, 1872, occurred in a high school building in Philadelphia. Elihu Thompson, a physics instructor, sought to make sparks of a large Ruhmkorff spark coil. A Ruhmkorff spark coil is basically, like, as far as I can remember, it's an inductor, and it's a bit like the Parkhomov woodpecker. But this is in 1872. More visible for his next lecture. Attaching one pole of the coil to a cold water pipe and reactivating the coil, Thomson was thrilled to find that the nature of the spark had changed from blue to white. Wishing to amplify this effect, Thomson attached the other pole to a large metal tabletop. Again, reactivating the coil produced a shrieking silver-white spark, entirely visible to any who sat in the last row. Wishing to show this to a colleague, Edward Houston, Thomson made for the door and was abruptly stopped. Touching the brass knob on the otherwise insulated oak door, Thomson received an unexpected sizzling shock. So metal is grabbing these things. It's wanting to take these things, or it's exciting them in a way. So I've got it here, static charge finding metals. Even is this because we have insulated shoes? Was he wearing some form of insulating shoes? Was he carrying static charge? Don't know, but it did like to move to the metals. Okay, and these, you know, these things from the work of Ken Shoulders and John Hutchison. They like to live in metals, and they diffuse into metals, so they can contaminate metals. So if I have one metal that has more of this and one with less, they will spread themselves out between the pieces of metal that are there. Okay, so calling for Edwin, he summarized what had occurred. Then turning the unit back on again, the stinging charge effects returned. The two gentlemen ran through the huge stone, oak and iron building with insulated metal objects now, each touching of a penknife or screwdriver to anything metallic, however distant from the coil or insulated from the floor, produced long, continuous white sparks. Okay. So, what am I doing? Okay, so the next one here is The Dissipation of Electricity, published just prior to Christmas of 1892. So I think this is before the discovery of electron and the discovery of X-rays. I think it was 1893 and 1895 or 1895, 1897, something like that. Is a pivotal Tesla lecture. This is the departure point in which Tesla abandons research and development of high-frequency alternating current, divorcing himself from that field entirely. Tesla describes the shock waves and other effects of impulses. In his article, Tesla describes the shield-permeating shocks as sound waves of electrified air. So, essentially, scalar waves in electrified air. Nevertheless, he makes a remarkable statement concerning the sound, heat, light, pressure, and shock, which he sensed passing directly through copper plates. Collectively, they imply the presence of a medium of gaseous structure that is one consisting of independent carriers capable of free motion. Okay? So, this is effectively something like the ether or neutral particles that can then be interacted with through these methods. Okay. So what do we do here? Not that one. That one. Okay. Next one here is the high voltage output of a DC generator was applied to twin conductors through his new arc mechanism. A very powerful permanent magnet sitting crosswise to the discharge path. The discharge arc was automatically and continuously blown out by this magnetic field. So what he's trying to do is this slapping of the hand in the water, this initial impulse, you need to, as soon as it's made, you need to break it away. So he used this magnetic quenching, and so like when you've got the current flowing, it's producing a magnetic field, and so the magnet, you know, adjacent to that will push it out of the way, and it would break the contact. So you could end up by continuously creating these pulses. So that's that. And what have I said here? Yeah, magnetic quench. Okay, so imperative towards obtaining the desired rare effect, the capacitor and its connected wire lines had to be so chosen as to receive the discharge, the acquired electric charge, in a unidirectional staccato fashion. The true Tesla circuit very much resembles a pulse jet, where no back pressure ever stops the onrushing flow. Electrostatic charge rises to a maximum and is discharged more quickly. Now, this explains why Ken Shoulder said when you have an EVO going into one material and then you have that EVO then goes into another one and you have a spark, it amplifies the effect because you end up with shorter and shorter pulses. Electrostatic charge rises to a maximum and is discharged more quickly. The constant application of high voltage dynamo pressure to the circuit ensures that continuous successions of charge rapid discharge are obtained. It is then and only then that the Tesla effect is observed. Pulses literally flow through the apparatus from the dynamo, the capacitor disruptor and its attached wire lines. They behave as a flutter valve, okay? And you will see in experiments that Henk Uren is currently doing in the coming week or two that something similar is occurring. Many thousands of very, very fast discharges are being affected by the combination of the Cockcroft-Walton, a cathode, anode of particular metal, which we'll talk about later, arranged in such a way with the DC bias to affect many thousands of these pulses. Okay. Now this is interesting. Objects placed near this device became powerfully electrified, retaining a singular charge sign for many minutes after the magnetic discharger had been deactivated. Now, when we had two nylon supports in the water flow plasma discharge system in 2017 of Suhas Ralkar, which he ostensibly used for producing his nickel foil that he used in his Echo reactor. He had a DC bias and he then used pulsed discharges through the water. This has been shared in Infinite Energy, but I have the videos and I will share it. I will endeavor to share it. I'll need to find out where I have those and put an article together. But I hypothesized that there would be charge build-up in this metal. And so I asked Suhas Ralkar, we got what do you call it? An ammeter, and we had ground on one end and we did the pulsing discharge, came out, and then we attached the other probe to that, and I think we measured like 3.1 volts, or I don't know, maybe no, I think it was 1.3 volts, but it was charged and it seemed to be charged for quite some time. I've never read this, but I was kind of thinking of what was going on in some other experiments that I had observed, but I would certainly agree that this could occur. Okay. So retaining a singular charge sign for many minutes after the magnetic discharger had been deactivated. Tesla found it possible to amplify these single charge effects by simple asymmetrical alignment of the magnetic discharger. By placing the magnetic discharger close to one or the other side of the charging dynamo, either force positive or force negative vectors could be selected and projected. Thus, charge could be projected into, so he's doing charge separation here and maybe throwing the ions or the electrons out in a particular direction. Maybe not the same thing as what I observed, but anyway. The charge could be projected into or drawn from any object in the field space. Introducing objects into the radiant space gave spectacular effects, becoming surrounded by crowns of white sparks. Objects charged by this apparatus evidenced a powerful and permeating charge action like no other seen before. This was a new electrical force. Tesla realized more than ever that he was in unknown territory. The fact that these radiant forces traveled as light-like rays distinguished them from the electromagnetic waves of Maxwell. The waves were weak, but these rays were strong, uncommonly strong. Now, this is a very interesting phrase for me here, and probably you will understand why. Tesla suspected that these effects were coherent. Tesla suspected that these effects were coherent. not subject to inverse laws other than those due to ray divergence. There we go. Trains of impulses exceeding 0.1 millisecond duration produced pain and mechanical pressures. In this radiant field, objects visibly vibrated. Sounds a lot like Hutchison effect. And even moved. Oh, sounds a lot like Hutchison effect. The force field drove them along. Thin wires exposed to sudden bursts of radiant field exploded into vapor. Interesting. With impulses of 1 microsecond duration, strong physiological heat was sensed. Further, decreases in impulse brought spontaneous illuminations. Sounds like the Hutchison effect. Capable of filling rooms and vacuum globes with white light. Shorter impulses produced cool, room-penetrating breezes. Oh, I remember John Hutchison talking about creating breezes by his effect, with the accompanying uplift in mood and awareness. Interesting. Yeah, sounds like it's the same thing. Okay, so next on this. Even the manner in which the pulse exploded as bright white discharges of greatly transformed voltage suggested the way in which gases behave when released from their confinements under pressure. These reflective meditations convinced Tesla that this effect was not purely electrical in nature. Closely examining the white flames, Tesla realized why there were no measurable electrical current at the crown of these activated coils. The normal heavy charge carriers, electrons, could not travel as quickly as the radiant pulse itself. Choked in the metallic lattice of the coil, electrons became immobile. No electron current moved through the coil at all. The radiant pulse, which moved over the coil surface, was therefore not electronic in nature. And he expands on this, saying, this gaseous component was not atmospheric in the ordinary sense. It was not the result of absorbed gases on the copper coil surface. This gas pulse travelled over the coil surfaces with superluminal velocity. Okay. Effects are cumulative. Now, this is what I'm talking about. You can affect certain outcomes by having certain intensity of these particles in a target sample. Tesla radiant energy effects grew with time. Tesla recognized the reason for this temporal growth process. There were no reversals in the source discharges. Therefore, the radiant energy would never remove the work performed on any space or material so exposed. As with unidirectional impulse discharges, the radiant electrical effects were additive and accumulative. In this respect, Tesla observed energy magnifications which seemed totally anomalous to ordinary engineering convention. So you could imagine, like, if you're firing monopoles into material and they are clustering and they're getting bigger and bigger, and these structures are able to interact with spin property of matter, be that an electron, be that a spin nuclei, or be that the quarks with spin within the nucleons themselves, you have several levels of action that can occur. Right. It was also easy for Tesla to control the heat of any space. Oh, is this single thermal bath extraction or inverse of that? Single thermal bath deposition of heat. By controlling both the voltage and impulse duration of energy in his transformers, Tesla could heat up a room. Cool breezes could also be arranged by appropriately setting the impulse duration. Now, one might think, oh, this is like, this is just the same as, however, you know, just like microwave heating or something. I disagree. I think that this is either condensing or blowing up natural neutrino condensates in the environment, and one produces heat and one removes heat. And so with this system, you can control the weather as I've described in the past. commonly called single bar thermal extraction or deposition. So actually, this is the first time that separation is discussed. Tesla used the violence of magnetically disruptive arc discharges to chaoticize electronic and etheric carriers in metal conductors. Breaking the agglomerations in which bind them together, each component was free to separate. And this is exactly what is being described by Shishkin. This, you can actually remove the etheric component, the relic neutrino condensates in the shell, from the nucleus, the positive charge, and from the electrons, the negative charge, the charge carriers, leaving behind these three components. And you can do it in any atom. But what they have found is that hydrogen is so much easier to achieve this effect with. It's 2,000 to 4,000 times easier. And you can imagine the heavier the element you get, the more difficult it is, and you'll get some of it occurring, but sometimes it won't occur. Okay. Now, this is beautiful for me when I read this. Tesla saw that electrical currents were actually streams of ether and its surrounding twist of electrons. I just sat there clapping. I said, you bad boy, you got it right there. So why am I saying that? Is when you see that fractal toroidal structure and its subquanta in various parts of the fracture sample from John Hutchison 2007, our sample, I was saying that it's twisting the electrons or the matter, the spin 27 aluminium spin isotope around itself. The thing is not spinning, it's spinning those spin nuclei or spin matter around itself. When it's excited with electrons, it's fed electrons and it becomes a white EVO, it's spinning the electrons around it. When it's interacting with the quartz like this and producing an EVO impact mark on here, on this lion thing, it's not melting the quartz. What it's doing is it's ripping the electrons out of that ionic oxide of silicon, okay, and it's moving them around, and so it's creating this mark, this impact mark, but it's not melting it, okay, it's shifting it around. So this was a beautiful phrase for me here. In this regards, the chief attribute of nitrogen in the magnetic disruptor seemed to be the absorption and removal of electrons from the stream. Now, he found that nitrogen was very, very effective, extremely effective. And the interesting thing is in producing very powerful ether streams. Nitrogen obviously is 14. It's significantly lighter element than indeed aluminium is. And nitrogen actually is 14, so it's not a spin. Is it spin? No, I don't think it's a spin. It's not a spin nuclei. It's definitely not. I want to make sure I'm not getting my facts wrong there. Maybe 15 is. But nitrogen 14 is 78% of the air we breathe. And so, and the interesting thing is, if you go and look at what I've already shared about strange radiation in Shishkin's work, they actually studied nitrogen in their work. Now, was that because Tesla was studying nitrogen, or did they just think that was obviously a cheap and available gas? I don't know. I think it might have been something to do with it. So, actually, so nitrogen, yeah, so nitrogen as a spin is an integer spin on 14, yeah. And it's nitrogen 15 is a half negative spin. But anyway, yeah, so nitrogen would be much easier to punch out the nucleus than other elements you might want to choose. But I just have to point out that we're also using residual air in Vega experiments. So when Henk or David are producing, you know, these visual displays. And part of that is because we're trying to create ball lightning effects, and ball lightning occurs in the atmosphere. And what is the atmosphere? 78% nitrogen. So, and there was also, I think, was it Lord Raleigh or something in 1932? They did these experiments in like a plates, like a bit like the Carrere brothers, and they saw excess energy being generated. I think we now know what that is. If you don't, you're going to know very soon by considering the material we are sharing. So once the ether stream had been cleared of its too constricting electronic envelope, it could flow freely. So they were using a magnetic disruptor to basically remove the electrons. And so this is interesting because this is what Bogdanovich et al. At the Moscow Nuclear Physics Institute was doing in their paper when they were firing high-speed electrons out of a beamline into a conversion target, say like tungsten, producing gamma rays, and passing that through two magnets. They were using the magnets to remove the electrons. And so having a linear magnetic field helps to remove the confounding electrons that otherwise impede the stream, because they're working on the electrons, because they can interact with the spin component of the electrons. Okay, all right. Okay, so effects on matter. The magnetic nitrogen gas disruptor was developed well beyond even this stage, until well into the 1930s. Tesla continued to speak of the device capable of producing intense rays. It was an open-ended tube, one which surrounded an electrified terminal with a streaming jet of suitable fluid. Through such means, Tesla claimed the release of co-limited rays having transcendent intensity. Tesla therefore appropriated means by which electrons were eliminated from currents while etheric components were accelerated and released. Tesla was no longer working with electricity. Tesla worked with ether currents, or vacuum currents in the terminology in the 2009 paper of David Freiberger. Or one could argue, possibly when they're closed pointing vectors in the terminology of Zverblis and Nevesky. New and startling effects could be obtained when once the separation process, the fractioning process, had been engaged. Tesla found that ether streams, though harmless to the body, were often devastating for more metallic things. Passage through various kinds of matter always produced new and strange effects. To illustrate the fact that these currents were not electrical, not some new manifestation of electronic current, Tesla often publicly performed a very strange demonstration. He grasped the upper terminal of one of his large transformers with one hand, while in the other hand holding a thick metal bar. Ether current flowed through carbonaceous and watery media without harm, i.e. his body. Nevertheless, Tesla dramatically proved the strange bombarding power of these non-electronic currents, as the metal in his hand either melted, I would say jellified, a bit like this one. Well, this is more fracturing than jellified. Maybe I should refer to this one. This is more jellified, let's say. This one this is jellified. Our old friend here. Not melted, jellified. Not melted, jellified. But to the untrained eye, it would look jellified. Melted, rather. Either melted or exploded. So, either melted or exploded. Either melted or exploded. All right. The reaction of metals was entirely due to the bombardment effect of ether on the matter. Yes, Nikola Tesla, you're right. Okay, this is talking about focusing. So, sorry, that one there, this was this one that I was talking about there. Okay, focusing. Etheric streams could be projected in extremely parallel paths by solid sheets of polished metal. Concave mirrors focus the streams. Oh, isn't this what Alexander Parkhomov found with radiant neutrino condensate from the cosmos? Cone-shaped hoods, so you can have a cone behind it. Okay, so you can have a parabolic dish like this behind the source, and it would focus the beams. And you could also focus the streams by having literally a cone on it. So if you had a cone like this, yeah, and you have the source inside, it's somewhere inside here, and this was, I don't know, maybe a piece of copper, it would focus the stream and they would come out the end. You could literally focus them. Cone-shaped hoods focus the streams. Placing gas-filled spheres in copper cylinders produced potent and directed rays. Tesla investigated the various aspects of rays, which his transmitters now projected with great interest. His radiant system was like no other. This projective radiance bore all the characteristics of light, yet was invisible. Tesla called these manifestations dark rays, or dark light. He found that they could be reflected when both their impulse rate was at a specific level, and when appropriate metal surfaces were intercepted. So I've got here Tesla's cosmic rays. Did he discover neutrons? Oh, so I did a presentation called Tesla Cosmic Rays. Did he discover neutrinos and EVOs in 1890s? So you can go and see my understanding a few years back on this subject prior to launch of the Space Earth Human Kickstarter. And I have a full reconstruction of Tesla's open letter at the time where he's basically saying, I was talking about these things in the 1890s when people were coming up with the idea of a neutrino. And so I've got the text of the letter there. So I'll put these references down into the Remote View blog tomorrow probably. Tesla observed that shadow graphs could be made by his beam projectors when intercepted by photographic films. Oh, what you mean like Shishkin's doing when he's got his cavitator. He accidentally discovered the effect while using light from his beam projectors to photograph himself and several friends. The developed image was one which revealed far more than the portrait itself. Tesla found that dark rays could pass through walls, producing images on fluorescent screens. Oh my God. Oh my God. Fluorescent screens. A fluorescent screen is something that has zinc sulfide or strontium aluminate. This is what you would have on the, the old cathode ray tube. That's what you have on the inside of that. It's a phosphor. It's a fluorescent screen. So this is essentially the basis for Shishkin et al.'s patent for shielding against string vortex solitons, aka strange radiation, aka what do you call it? Black evos, aka this radiant energy. And so the shielding patent from 2013, which is free to use because the money wasn't paid on it, for shielding against strange radiation is phosphors, is fluorescent materials, and therefore Tesla was seeing these things a long time ago. The effects were not X-rays being reflected from thick metal walls. So, like I say, you can reflect these things just as has been shown by Parkhomov. And then, so you can reflect these things and then bounce them. If it was X-rays, it would continue to go through and be attenuated. So it's not the same thing as X-rays, okay? With the simple first such projectors, Nikola Tesla found it possible to wirelessly illuminate lamps at great distances, push objects, oh, Hutchison effect, charge objects, oh, Hutchison effect, and burn holes through objects, oh, Hutchison effect. In short, any amount of power could be delivered along beam ray channels. In this, we glimpse subatomic particle streams, not completely electronic in nature. Okay. Etheric streams could be projected in extremely parallel paths. I think I've just read this, haven't I? Yeah, okay. Ether particles were extremely mobile, virtually massless when compared with electrons, and could therefore pass through matter with very little effort. Sounds like a neutrino. Electrons could not keep up with either the velocity or the permeability of etheric particles. According to this view, ether particles were infinitesimals, very much smaller than electrons themselves, and the scale of these things has been very well detailed by colleagues of Shishkin, and you will see that. Incompressible ray lines can move through any distance instantly. Should the path be 300,001 kilometers long, the impulse at the source will reach that point as quickly as at all other points. So basically, instant communication is my note here, and we've discussed that. In addition to this inherent momentum, ether streams would actually interact with matter only with the proper conductive materials were stressed with the proper impulse intervals. Okay, so there is a resonant phenomena going on. So you can have these streams, but you need to be resonant with the material, and this is where you get a combination of these things going on in the Hutchison effect. Where you're not only building these magnetic charges up in a target, but you're interacting with those magnetic charges with a frequency. Okay. The interchange of energy into matter and matter into energy. Oh, this sounds like transmutation and synthesis and desynthesis. Yeah, that's everything there. Presupposed a fundamental materium. Victorians considered the etheric gases to be this materium. One could theoretically pass a concentrated ether stream through any material and produce new elements and energetic emanations. That is essentially my presentation on the ultra experiment in Azizi. I'm saying that either the coherent ground state preparators demonstrations of water can be in a coherent ground state even at room temperature, even up in hundreds of degrees. A proportion of it is in the coherent ground state. With its polar nature, with easy water, charge separation going on in a vortical structure, a toroidal vortical structure, leads to the yin-yang, one toroid one way, one toroid the other, leads to another flow, and this coheres a stream of dark matter, the relic neutrinos, through a point, and then where that flux of dark matter goes, in the opposite direction you have the matter, because the toroid's going like that, it's pulling material through, but the toroidal moment goes out in the opposite direction and pulls the etheric matter, the dark matter through the other direction, and they meet at that central point, and that is where the transmutation occurs. And because of the fractal toroidal moment, you end up with a spherical zone, a pinch point, where you have an ordinary matter going one way and the dark matter going the other way. So it's a self-focusing matter transmutation system through the medium of water. So there we go. This is the same thinking based on all of Tesla's experience. The same thinking based on all of Tesla's experience. His statements concerning material generation and transmutation were perceived as ravings. I'm pretty sure that people at the conference at Assisi were considering what I was saying as ravings. I don't think they are. I am happy to be considered mad like Tesla. If that ever was to be a thing that I was labelled with. Right. Coming at it from a completely different area, from a different experiment, but in my I do have the fortune that Kladov did his patents, awarded his patents in 1980, and since then there's been many other people, some that I have worked with, others that I've met and discussed things with. For instance, when I gave my presentations on the observations in eco fuel in 2000 and what was it, 2017, yeah, at Constigliani di Asti. Tom Claytor came up with me, who had been then working with Roger Stringer, and he says, "We're seeing the same things." So if Tom Claytor is seeing it, and you know, I think I'm on not shaky ground here. So I feel for Tesla, but you know, the thing is, Tesla doesn't think he's raving mad. He knows what he's seeing. He's worked from the qualitative data, and he knows what he's seen. He knows that that's what's going on. And this particular phrase here, the interchange of energy into matter and matter into energy, presupposed a fundamental materium. Victorians considered the etheric gases to be this materium. One could theoretically pass a concentrated ether stream through any material and produce new elements and energetic emanations. This is the ultra experiment. Quantum physics applies to a very specific realm of energetic transactions, one whose properties are entirely bound up in considerations of inertia. Please go and watch the Ludmilla presentation from the recent Russian cold nuclear transmutation and ball lightning conference 27 that was held last week. And the discussion on the Wednesday night. I think you'll find it very, very interesting. And Ludmilla has literally written the book on spin that I found out last week. So, dear, it's all lining up very nicely. Right, supported on a single lead wire, these bulbs produced then unheard of effects. So he's talking about the carbon filament light bulb, the carbon button light bulb. Tesla placed jewels, light metals, heavy metals, non-metals, and radioactive materials in these globes. He immersed these materials in various gaseous atmospheres. He finally tried hard vacuum. Ether streams exploded through the various crystalline lattices placed atop the single electrode. Each unidirectional impulse passed directly through the material and out into the surrounding space. Electrode matter was simply evaporated, converted to ether and other particles. Electrode matter was simply evaporated, converted to ether and other particles. This is complete destruction of matter. This is conversion to light and leptons and fragments of whatever's left. The hardest, most refractory metals simply vanished. Oh, what you mean, like was observed by Yul Brown using Brown's gas in 1980, like was observed by the Sapphire Group. Oh, and what was observed by Henk Uren and other people. And who was the other one? It's the guy who came up with Ormus, David Hudson. Sorry, that's my reference from the 1980s. But it was observed by Mizuno in the 1990s, this disappearance of tungsten. But there are other people who do not believe they are working in the same universe that have observed molybdenum and tungsten so-called vaporizing in their electrical discharge apparatus. It's not what they think it is. It is this. Sorry, it is this. Sorry, not sorry. Okay. The hardest, most refractory metals simply vanished away after several seconds of this treatment. Tesla said that impulses acted as tiny hammers, passing from within the substance itself out to space. Here was proof that ether was converting matter into pure energy. Here was proof that ether was converting matter into pure energy. It is going, in my view, into the quark level of matter, disrupting the baryons, the protons and the neutrons, and causing matter to fall apart. Tesla noted that the radiant expulsions actually passed through the globes. In many cases, they left only a faint metallic stain. Soon, continued exposure to the ether streams drove even these stains away. And I've just noted here, disappearance of refractory metals like tungsten and molybdenum. I wonder who has observed that. Now, here is a very, very key point. This is a very, very key point. It took years for me to realize that aluminium was probably the best. Well, actually, I said it in 2016 actually 2007 publicly in my Red Pill presentation in Mumbai Technical University. But in part, it was because of the work of John Hutchison. Aluminium seemed to be the most affected material, and certainly these are the ones where we got the most interesting phenomena going on, and I think you're going to see something that has come to this. And I had these discussions in Japan with Dr. George Eagley, and you can see the recording of that on our SoundCloud, where I'm talking about, various people over the years have observed this phenomena with aluminium particularly. And I said there's something very special about aluminium, and unlike the other superconductive elements, aluminium is both light, so it can fuse easily and give energy gain, but it is a spin nuclei. Sorry, it is a paramagnetic spin nuclei. The other highly conductive metals, gold, silver and copper, are diamagnetic. So whilst those elements reject these things to a degree, the electrons draw them in on the surface, but the actual nuclei reject them. The magnetic nature of the nuclei reject them. Aluminium invites these things in, so it's more affected by them, and so it has this ability to fuse. Obviously, we see it fusing to aluminium, but if you've got a spin nuclei of hydrogen there, and you've got a spin nuclei of 27 aluminium, you fuse those two together, you get silicon, which is a non-spin nuclei, so it kind of falls out of the equation. But it doesn't matter after a while. They all get consumed, as I'm saying. It gets down to the quark level. Right. And this is my big discussion point for tonight, the quark aspect of it. So I didn't really necessarily want to quite go there in front of the two presentations I was giving. It's for you guys. So the problem Tesla faced in obtaining purified radiant energy currents was found to be the very conductive media which he was forced to use as conductors. Materials appropriate to the release of contaminant-free emanations could no longer be the familiar copper or even silver. Conductors now were necessarily the very light metals. For this purpose, Tesla relied on metals such as magnesium, aluminium, and even beryllium. Now, I can't use beryllium because it's toxic. I can't use magnesium because it reacts with water. The only choice out of the ones that Tesla is presenting here that I could readily use in the experiments in Ultra is aluminium. Aluminium is a light element, and the reason is if you start with heavier elements, you start producing contaminated radiant energy. And what do I mean by contaminated? Well, Shishkin showed that these things, if you're not fully disassociating them, and you end up with your ether vortex capturing ions and electrons, those can be teleported inside you, and then they blow up, and they're firing out those ions. And I think with nitrogen, even with some of the elements that they were observing, they found that the pit and the depth and the width showed that these particles were fired out, and when the string vortex solitons, these radiant energy clusters were blowing up. These black EVOs were blowing up. The strange radiation structures were blowing up. They were firing out these ions that they were carrying at such kinetic velocities they would kill red blood cells, and they could cause DNA damage to white cells, white blood cells. And so you don't want that. And these would be the stinging that you feel in your body as these things are blowing up, as they've gone into the skin. They kind of get stopped to a degree by the water and the carbon in your body, and then they blow up and they produce these stinging sensations. If you don't want the stinging, Tesla's already established that you need to create pure etheric radiation, radiant energy, and that is created by magnesium, aluminium, or even beryllium. Toxic beryllium. Magnesium can't be used underwater, so we have aluminium that we're choosing. Isn't everything lining up rather peachy? Isn't it? It's just wonderful. Now, I would suggest lithium as well. It's a spin nuclei, lithium-7, and but again, it reacts with water, but it's even lighter. Now, why is it important that it's lighter? Well, because the lighter it is, the easier it is to punch out the nuclei and do the proper charge separation, giving you your ether cluster, the relic neutrino condensate. Okay, so this is the most practical element that was available to him at the time. It's conductive, and so on. We are currently doing experiments. Henk has taken the initiative himself to use aluminium electrodes in the current experiments, and I'll be sharing those over the next week. It is spectacular what is being observed, absolutely spectacular, actually mind-bendingly spectacular. But I would suggest to him potentially to use, see if you can get some magnesium aluminium alloy, which is a known alloy. It's the sort of thing that they make alloy wheels of in cars. But even maybe get some magnesium. Obviously, the handling the magnesium is more difficult than the magnesium aluminium or alloy. So I would prefer the latter. And I would expect that we will see even more spectacular effects than we are currently seeing with the aluminium that is in the reactor. But what we are seeing with the aluminium is really incredibly special. And so I'm hoping to go either next weekend or the weekend after, as soon as I possibly can, to document a whole experiment and do the on-site macro macroscopy and macro photography and stack photography, because the things that are produced are stunning, and they tell you a lot about what's going on. And so this is not Vega Valley, but there's things going on that are similar, and so there's some very interesting things. Bismuth is at the other end of the scale, Mescal, so not bismuth. That would produce difficult things. Okay. Right. So the next point here is, where are we? In certain modern reproductions of these experiments conducted by the renowned Eric Dollard, vacuum bulbs so activated actually ruptured into tiny holes. Okay, so these are the exotic vacuum objects boring their way through the vacuum tubes. I now know that the Russian scientists were playing with me. I'm pretty sure, because I think they know exactly what was going on back in 2015 in January when I visited. Was it January? No, February. When I visited the Joint Plasma Physics Institute in North Moscow. And they had some Parkhomov fuel in an alumina chamber, and they said, have you seen this before? What do you think it is? And they attached a hydrogen hose to one end, and they showed that there were holes, tiny holes all over it, and it was spraying out jets of hydrogen which they could light. And of course, this was observed by Ken Shoulders, and it's where the EVO is boring through the alumina, and this would be the same thing here. So we are definitely 100%, absolutely, without any shadow of a doubt in my mind, talking about exactly the same phenomena. Okay. Beam rays. Tesla found that these globe-expelled streams manifested strange effects beyond the glass containers. He was able to charge capacitors to dangerous charge levels at great distances by focusing the light from these globes. Their light was electrified. In bombardments, ether did more than eject quanta. In this special light, Tesla saw that ether streams were manufacturing electrons. You can generate electrons with things. I'm a firm believer in that. And other detritus. Well, okay, this might be transporting them, and the detritus would be the transport of ions. Or the transmutation of material and the debris that is produced by that. This provoked his study of quanta, particles which he considered tightly constricted streams of ether, deformed by material passage into ultra-microscopic foci. Tesla believed that particles could be undone by appropriate means. This would release the etheric contents. And so he basically, this is very similar in my view to this this wormhole where the material could pass through a wormhole. It's a highly constricted stream and ultra microscopic foci. Tesla believed that particles could be undone by appropriate means. This would release the etheric contents at an insignificant amount of energy per particle. The stability of particulate matter depended only upon the fixed movements of ether particles in their constricted radii. Particles' charge carriers themselves demonstrated a remarkable consistency in either projecting or absorbing ether streams. In this phenomenon, Tesla perceived an ultimate ether energy source. In his later years, he would seek means to release a purified etheric energy. So, manufacturing electrons is the key point there. And this wormhole type thing, which is in Matsumoto's book as well. Tesla experimented with ruby, zirconium, diamond, sapphire, carborundum, each producing a brilliant light until disintegration. He simply could not find a refractory material which could withstand the passage of the radiant flux without vaporizing. The lamps which Tesla finally succeeded in developing, carbon button vacuum globes, did not require an amperage. These lamps gave off intensely brilliant light, approaching the intensity and quality of true sunshine. The reason for his reliance on carbon was truly intriguing. Used in latter stages of his transformers, metals could become deadly producers of electron dartlets. Etheric bombardments manufactured electrons in copper terminals. These contaminated the otherwise smooth and harmless ether streams. Tesla sought a material whose response to ether bombardment would not result in the introduction of electrons or any other free ionic charge. Carbon performed well in permitting a smooth and unhindered flow of ether, one which remained essentially unchanged. In fact, it was his carbon button lamps that Tesla made some of the greatest strides in ether technology. Okay, now, we know that whatever elements you give to these type of technologies, from Brown's work in the 1980s and from the 1990s work of Matsumoto and from our studies, it seems to produce carbon. Okay, and so if you're starting with carbon and it likes to produce carbon, it's kind of got nowhere else to go. Now, we can collapse the matter, but if you work within a parameter space, it's kind of like making and breaking and making and breaking. It's basically a hard stop for this thing, and this was also observed by Leclerc as well. You know, it would synthesize carbon and then it kind of gets stuck there, and the sun kind of does this as well. So carbon can act as, in the CNO chain, as a catalyst. It goes round in a loop and it ends up back at carbon. So you know, and also his carbon button lamps were it's a little bit of a misnomer, because he used this tar and then he would roll that in diamond paste or diamond fragments. And diamond, as we now know from the work we did with understanding the Lion reactor, and part of the reason it was suggested by me in 2013, it obviously has this incredible heat capacity, but it also is the best emitter of electrons. So could it be the best emitter of etheric particles? It would seem that it is. So for whatever reason, carbon interacts very differently with these technologies than other elements. And we know this when we added any form of hydrocarbon to the Amarza gas, it stopped it from destroying the matter. It would actually convert it into thermal heat, and so you had more incandescence on a thermal level, on broader frequencies of light. When you didn't have the carbon in the HHO, in the Amarza gas, you would end up at much lower temperatures disintegrating tungsten, disintegrating titanium, burning holes through materials, and we were well below on our bolometer the melting point of those things. And even in the case of indium, which is 156.6 degrees C, it was literally incandescent when it's flapping around in the breeze like it's a piece of jelly. And that is crazy to think that you have this incandescent light coming off it. But eventually it did transmutation in there, as we saw and I presented in my poster session at ICCF 22. And so all these other materials end up being destroyed or transmuted or disappeared by this etheric flow from these particles. But in the case of carbon, it kind of like thermalizes it and kind of goes round in a loop. And so you don't have this problem. So our findings, the findings of Brown, the findings of Amarza, the findings of other people since, like Solin. Solin in 1992 says it predominantly produces carbon and alpha particles. And so all of these different people's findings are the same findings as Tesla. Okay. Okay. But at special impulse rates, these white discharges disappear and a dark light emanation is powerfully produced. A very special radiation. It is neutral, penetrating, and not of a species identified with ultraviolet, X-ray or gamma ray or neutron streams. By 1893, Tesla had designed and operated signaling systems. Now this is interesting. He's talking about 1893, and I just want to note here, as I said earlier, the electron was discovered by J.J. Thomson in 1897, and the X-ray by Wilhelm Röntgen in November the 8th, 1895. So he's talking about all these things here in this paragraph, and then he steps back in time to when these things weren't actually discovered. So, but obviously it's a retrospective view. Okay. Okay. Now, someone mentioned bismuth mescal earlier. Tesla found that heavier metals produced an amazing variety of contaminating particulate emissions. And as Shishkin et al. Found, it captures these ions and it transports them. You don't want that, especially if it's transmuting them. You don't know what's coming out, and you really want the pure streams if you want to do experiments in a pure sense. If the electron-rich emissions from his original copper sphere terminals were life-hazardous discharges, the emissions from these tubes were far more dangerous. So he's saying that, you know, if you are using heavier metals and emitting these dirty etheric streams, you are going to be getting much worse than just electrical stingings. And in fact, as I'm saying, I don't believe that they're pure electron stingings. They are actually these clusters blowing up and shooting bullets of ions into your body, and so not good at all. Now, this is a very, very important point here. Very, very important point. The projected ether streams could be directed through very long distances without the slightest sign of divergence. They were intensely powerful. Indeed, these rays seem to self-constrict, a nature unknown in the electromagnetic spectrum. They self-constricted. We have caught these on video. I studied the work of the replications of Henk Uren's work by David Butelier in Canada, and we observed these extraordinary effects of interactions, where you had these particles coming out and then another one would come out and it would orbit around it. They would spiral together and form a constricted stream. They like to attract each other. And so, if you're generating them from one source and they're all going in a unidirectional beam, then they would do even more of this self-organization and self-focusing process. So we've caught these things doing what he's claiming here on video, and I believe it's because these things mostly like to interact with each other than other things, and it's only when they get full of electrons or they get full of ions that they start interacting with anything else in a meaningful sense. But when they're on their own, they mostly interact with themselves, even long before they get there, because they are pulling ether. They're pulling the relic neutrinos in front of them and producing a spin, this fractal toroidal moment in front of them that goes out much faster than they're traveling. And they interact with other things, trying to cohere matter and grab this matter and condense it. So there we go. So I think that's a very, very important point there. So Daniel Foster, good night. I know it's difficult for everyone, but they can... catch up later, I guess. All right. We've not got too much to do. Like I say, I only got to page 69, yin yang. So we can look at this another time. So, blah, blah, blah. These beams could be focused to a tiny pinpoint and directed into metals. The stream simply sprayed over the surface. But when the impulse durations were carefully adjusted, the spray became a needle, which easily pierced the plate. In this permeating stream of force, metal plates simply melted, or jellified. It could be melted. In some cases, they exploded. Tesla found it possible to burn diamond with such pinpoints of force. That is, they passed through the atomic lattices of those materials, and in so doing, carried information in the stream. Shishkin says that in their work they found that if the string vortex solitons passed through matter, they took on some of the properties of the matter. This is the same thing being accredited to Tesla. Okay, this section here is probably one of the most important, and so we'll do a little bit more on this, but it's not so much. Once initiated and maintained, the space-flowing currents from a beam ray tube could not be extinguished. Difficult at first to believe, but the ether currents from such devices for a time continued. Tesla found it possible to produce long-lasting currents which persisted throughout his laboratory and demonstration spaces. All he needed to do was turn on a beam ray tube to stimulate the space flow. Tesla found that the removal of ether currents from a space in which they had been directed was not easy. No ether currents were not easily extinguished. So, in my view, this is superfluid and superconducting and self-sustaining. And my early thoughts on this, I'll give you my early thoughts on this, but, based on what I experienced, but obviously I read this the other day, so it's interesting. So any strong currents in the ether would gather other energy from the surrounding etheric atmosphere. Once started, these would continue for an hour or more. Right, this is very, very important. I'm saying that the fractal toroidal moment because when you shoot a beam of anything through a fluid, you're going to get vortices. So you end up creating these vortices, and if they capture electrons, they're going to create fractal vortices. Okay, so this self-organizing structure occurs. So you have these vortices going on in there, these torsional systems. Okay, and they are strong enough in their toroidal moment to start capturing more ether. okay, that is in the environment. And so I called this in 2000, I think it was 2016 or 2017. It was in ASTI, so 2017 probably. I called this my how should we put this? The Dyson air blade effect, where you have a vortex being produced, and it ends up by pulling more air through than you're actually pushing into the blade, as it were, because of the pressure differential on the outside to the inside. Because it's kind of like a circular wing, and it's creating a kind of vortical structure around it. So I call this the air blade air multiplier effect, but in the case of the Evo, it's doing that in this ether flow. And so what it does is you have the flux you originally generate, but then it starts pulling more material in from the surrounding area. Now, there is no comment more important to this concept than one that was said off the cuff out of a presentation by Shishkin in 2018 in Sochi. He said that his cavitator would produce the string vortex solitons, which, as we know now, are these condensed relic neutrinos or cold neutrino condensed clusters, which we know that potentially are coming from either the toroidal moment condensing them from the environment, or from cavitation producing intense energy that does this shock wave that is producing them in situ. So there's two ways, but the latter way we know is not the most important way. It's the actual fractal toroidal moment in a yin-yang structure that is produced in cavitation systems. That is the most important one, because if it wasn't, then his device would continually produce them via cavitation, okay? But they didn't. They stopped producing it, and he has to physically move it to another point in his lab. Now, why is that important? Well, we know that metals and other materials can partially reflect these things. So, like when you do the sun, moon, and earth alignment in Xu Wenju's work and in Maurice Allais, the moon is acting as a thing that's either partially reflecting or diffracting these things. And so you get a different level of flux. Now, if you imagine you're in an enclosed space, within that enclosed space, you have a certain amount of these things that are already in there. And if you condense the ones that are already in that space into these condensed relic neutrino condensates, and they come out as these string vortex solitons, then you have kind of like run out of the available etheric structures, the cold neutrinos, relic neutrinos in the environment. And so it has a fall off, it has an event horizon where over the toroidal moment can cohere these things. So you physically have to move his cavitator to a different part of the lab. Okay, so if you effectively add we know, therefore, there are a certain amount in an environment, and if you deliberately create a stream, it will be able to cohere those from the environment for a period of time. And so I believe that this is in line with what is attributed to Tesla here. Okay, so Tesla demonstrated this principle of action. Lamps remained brightly lit long after power had been withdrawn. So this isn't like it's basically life after death, not heat after death, but light after death. And I believe it's due to this the vacuum currents, the currents of these etheric flows are capturing more from the environment and keeping the process going. When merely placed in the paths where ether currents had been directed, lamps could be reignited. This condition persisted for several minutes, evidence that ether currents kept flowing long after the beam ray tube was extinguished. Tesla very casually mentioned this fact when describing a process by which he could obtain energy for hours after his impulse transmitters were disconnected. Tesla described this ionized condition in the ambient medium. He also described the nature of strange discharges obtained from organic materials, clothes,
hair, wooden objects produced soft white gossamer sparks for an equivalent hour or more. These were long, so this was basically building charge on these things, I guess, by grabbing charge from the environment, being dragged along by the etheric flow and going on to, things like clothes and hair, which were, non-conductors. So they would build up the static charge, and then you would have these sparks coming off, maybe. These were long, very clingy and thready, strange gossamer. Such discharges do not sound familiar. Okay, so anyway, note that we have this 2-hour delay in various observations from Oroitskev and from Bogdanovich. And I believe that when you get these structures bound to a magnetic or paramagnetic nuclei, they are continuing to grab in ether so they can persist for a period of time. And it might be that the density of relic neutrino condensates is lower in the night because we are effectively further away from the sun, and higher in the day, and that you basically can persist for about 2 days before it goes below a threshold in the experiments that they had done. It might be that if you were to go up into the tundra during the summer, where it's permanently exposed to the sun and there's little variation, it may be more or less, but then of course you're further away in terms of radius from the sun, so it may actually persist for less time. But it would be an interesting experiment to do. Okay, so then we're on to the last major points here, really. Okay. In addition, Tesla found that space-traversing currents gained extra power from the surrounding etheric supply. This extra supply was pulled into the current channel, guided only by its own momentum. This was why ether power did not diminish, as other energetic manifestations. Ether, possessed of momentum, did not suffer from frictional losses either, so it's like a superfluid. Ether beams remained rigidly fixed in their position, flowing on and on until gradual diminution process finally brings them to a halt. An experimenter, Mr. Gregory Hodowitz, has conducted experiments in this fascinating field. He has successfully corroborated the claims of Tesla, showing that in most remarkable and simple manner that any impulse, movement, or stimulation in an etheric atmosphere continues to flow in place for hours at a time, along with the gravitic waves. Oh, gravity waves here, that's interesting, with which he is principally concerned. Mr. Hodowitz employs capacitors to detect etheric impulses in space. Most remarkably, he has extended the science of ether into an exploration of gravitation. I rest my case. Okay. Okay, so that was there, right. In his use of etheric streams, Tesla found a remarkable resultant elevation in both sensation and consciousness. Ideas seemed to emerge and visions clarified during these exposures. Interactions of bioorganic matter with ether pulsations became the source of vitalizing influences. Ether was neutral and did not ionize matter unless focused and delivered as a short duration impulse train. So he's basically saying that when ether is at the right flux rate and at the right pulsation, it could be beneficial to cognition and bioorganic matter, and he chose to expose himself and found it beneficial. So that is not to say that pulses are the same thing. Ether was so responsive to manipulations from the received end of the stream that cascade reactions would quickly spread along the stream back to its source. Thus, a receiver could literally force the ether source to feed it wherever it moved. The receiver of the ether force could force the transmitter to feed it. This would be the sun sourcing its ether stream from the black hole at the center of our galaxy. This would be the Earth sourcing part of its ether stream from the sun. It's like a big network feeding each other. This was the result of pressure laws, superluminal speeds, and etheric density. Any rare refraction in the ether flow would instantly tug ether into the lower pressure volume. Ether responses occurred with superluminal velocity, conditions being established and strengthened after a small such manipulation of the flow. And I comment here, in my view, this supports the relic neutrino condensate push model of gravity and gravity beams. Okay, and then I read on. Tesla firmly ascribed to the etheric theory of gravitation. Gravitation was evidence that a groundward etheric pressure was at work, permeating mass and producing fixed relationships of attraction with respect to the Earth proper. The apparent constant acceleration of different falling masses was accordingly calculated as a function of density and cross-section. Theoretically, the concept remains a curiously flawless explanation of gravitation. Perhaps the recent scientific world too much resembles the world of pop art and music, where fickle fads and novelties are more important than expressions of excellence. So, I agree. This has been absolutely total affirmation, in my view, that these few paragraphs here, that I'm on the right track in terms of what gravity is. And I would add to this that it is the consumption and condensation of the relic neutrino condensate, which represents vastly more matter than it exists in all of the stars and all of the solid bodies in the cosmos. This is the food of the universe. My original name for a presentation I gave a couple of weeks back. The food of the universe. And it feeds the planets, it feeds the stars, it feeds the moons, it feeds the comets, it feeds the black holes. And in doing so, when these things are condensing the matter, they are producing a gravitational wave. And that is sucking in the material. And it's instantaneous, according to this work, is suggesting it's superluminal, like the communications that you can have with this. By rarefracting this source, you can have a superluminal communication method. One sees flying. So there we go. That's gravitation done by it. One sees flying craft and ocean vessels drawing power from one of the world broadcast stations, the bright beam tracking each target and supplying it with motive power. In this, it was evident that ether streams were ruled by pressure principles and responded to pressure changes instantly. But pressures in what atmosphere? Well, in the atmosphere of the ether. Many other etheric drifts were measured. Shifting and wandering, these could be measured with changes in seasons and weather patterns. Seasons and weather patterns. Yes, okay. That's why the seeds germinate when they do, right? Tesla perceived that whirls, eddies, and laminar flow lines revealed a dynamic ether. That's okay. Space ether. Entering the metallic layers of the capacitor, these ether particles were manufacturing electrons. Yep, I agree. And this is where we've got the termed cosmic rays that he talked about. Tesla stated that true cosmic rays were like radiant energy, not at all like heavy ions and gamma rays, which Millikan was detecting. So Tesla is saying that these cosmic rays are in fact these things that we now understand are relic neutrinos. More than this, Tesla was now about to harness the eternal wheelworks of nature. Yep, that's what he was going to do. Yep. So this is a conceptual thing, but it just turns out that the wheelwork looks exactly like a wheel. That's what it looks like. It's a wheel within a wheel within a wheel. Fractal to the nth degree. So The etheric volumes which came to Earth from space was an incalculable volume, a power source of eternal consequence. It arrived to Earth under extreme pressure, a value which Tesla calculated in the range of several hundred million volts. Tesla stated that the etheric pressure, so several hundred million volts. So when we were looking at the, is it the Wallace paper, I think, on anti-gravity, they were referring, or the ARV, they were referring to 1.2 million volts. So that is nowhere near this level, but he's saying that there are several hundred million volts. Tesla stated that the etheric atmosphere, though often a dark light, floods the Earth at all times with its great power. Tesla stated that both the geo-internal radioactive elements and the native heat of the Earth was a direct result of etheric bombardment from space. So he's not specifically saying that here, but if you are getting geo-internal radioactive elements and heat, certainly energy is being transferred, and maybe he's saying that radioactive elements are being caused by the bombardment. But is he saying they are generating the radioactive elements, or by synthesis, by fusion, or is he suggesting that there is fission going on? It's not clear. I'm specifically and absolutely clearly stating that relic neutrinos and other dark matter, potentially, like axions or whatever, which may also be clusters of relic neutrinos, if they're ever properly identified, they are condensed into ordinary matter. And that generates heat, but it also produces a gravitational well. Although the sun was a dominant source of radiant energy, Tesla stated that it was not the only supplier of the etheric particles. Now, as I said before, Parkhomov has shown that only 2 or 3 or whatever % of the output of the sun's neutrino particles are relic neutrinos, because they don't have the velocity to escape the sun's gravitational wells, and they have mass, and so that is the fact there. But there's still a flood of them coming from the sun, and they do generally permeate the matter, but you have this constant stuff coming from space. Ether was expelled from all points in interstellar space, a constant supply of natural radiant energy. Such energy was released by stellar processes. Since the sun was a local ether source, it figured in the total ether supply. I agree with that. The normal space influx was therefore augmented during the daytime by the additional solar supply. I agree with that. Also, what he doesn't consider is the gravitational lensing, and that when you are in the day, you are closer, and when you're in the summer, you are closer to the relic neutrino halo, the neutrino sphere of the sun. So you're going into a denser flux of these etheric particles. Bombarding the Earth from all directions, radiant energy entered the Earth. Once having passed through the crust, it was sufficiently slowed to lodge deep within the mantle. After passing through these miles of rock, the highly pressured and kinetically energetic ether transferred its prodigious energies to the deeper material of the Earth itself. So he's talking about kinetic transfer, which is in a way an energy transfer. But what Parkhomov has shown is that you are generating relic neutrino equivalents, cold neutrinos, and that these can do weak interactions and cause electrons, for instance, to bind to neutrons to make protons, which is making heavier elements. That is specifically what's happening there. So that thinking isn't there, but then, to be fair, no one had fissioned an element back there in it was 1932 before Cockcroft and Walton did that in the proton colliding with a 7 lithium, fusioning to 8 beryllium, and then fissioning to 2,4 alpha. So that was the first time. So you can forgive him for not being able to think like that. But certainly he's saying energy is being captured in the Earth, okay? And energy, there's a mass-energy relationship, okay? Okay. So that's the internal heating, and that's it. So that is page. Like I say, I got to page 69. which I think is hilarious. There we go. I got to page 69. And it goes on for quite a bit more than that. And so we'll review that on another day. I will have a look at any comments you might have now. But that is essentially what I wanted to say today. And that essentially, in review, the key thing here is, as I said at my Azizi presentation, that the secret of Cold War technology is understanding true charge separation. True charge separation. And what is true charge separation? It is separating the negative charge of electrons, the positive charge of, say, protons or other nuclei, and the bit in the middle, which is the relic neutrino condensate, the radiant energy component. And as I shared at my Azizi presentation, Shishkin and Dubovik, and I think it's Corollas or whatever, the team there at Dubna, they've established that for hydrogen isotopes, it's 2,000 to 4,000 times easier to create this proper charge separation than it is with any other element. And to get good charge separation, you needed light elements. And in his tubes, he used nitrogen. This is Tesla. That is 14 nucleons. Okay, this is pretty light. But in terms of metals, he used beryllium, he used magnesium, and he used what did he use? He used beryllium, magnesium, and aluminium. Beryllium's toxic. Actually, beryllium is used in, what is it used in? It's used in magnetrons, isn't it? Yeah, okay. So that's the toxic bit about magnetrons, the really toxic bit. We can't be using that on a regular basis, but he also used magnesium. We are currently exploring the use of aluminium. In part, this was like feedback to Joe Jiggly with his device, and then that's come back, and I gave some explainers on why aluminium is a good choice in this presentation. It has paramagnetic nature, unlike the other high conductors like copper, silver, and gold. They are diamagnetic. So whilst they will provide the electrons to excite the neutral clusters, they will kind of reject the clusters to a degree. And so aluminium is better because it allows for aggregation more easily. And it's all of those elements are spin nuclei. Now, in the case of, for instance, tungsten, not all of the isotopes are spin nuclei. It is a high conductivity, so there are some aspects where it has this high conductivity property, and there are some spin nuclei, but there are others that are not. And it is also, I believe, paramagnetic. So tungsten and those other refractory metals are kind of halfway between the two, but tungsten is particularly vulnerable because of its high mass, so it falls apart, and so you have these disappearing events that have occurred in our experiments and several other people that I've referred to with respect to disappearing tungsten in the past. Okay, so and I believe that is a large proportion of the energy yield from Parkhomov's 225-day reactor is the tungsten. So in the case of the 225-day reactor, I explained that you have this dendritic nickel. This produces ectons, which are exotic vacuum objects yielded from the shock of the ectonic explosion, the Coulombic explosion, produces this true charge separation, the production of these EVOs, which then cluster in the paramagnetic tungsten, and then they build up over a period of time in combination with the flux of relic neutrino analogues, the cold neutrinos, produced by the high temperatures, 1700 degrees. That feeds the beast. The beast is already sitting in the tungsten. It causes the fissioning of tungsten, and we showed that from a Mars gas. It produces calcium, and in his reactor, the calcium went from about 1% to 20%. And so you can see the whole kind of process of what's going on. So the nickel didn't matter that it melted at 1390 degrees centigrade because it had already produced I used to call the active agents, and these were sitting bound into the nuclei of the tungsten and being fed both with electrons and relic neutrino equivalent cold neutrinos being synthesized because the temperature is at 1700 degrees. So there we go. That is this whole kind of process. In Pat's device, he's producing charge clusters from the gamma rays or whatever from his radioactive sources. They are clustering together, and then he uses discharge to blow them up, and so it releases the energy. And so you have then a magnetohydrodynamic effect, which produces electricity in the coiled cylinder and so forth. And the accident I've already explained. So I explained both those things in my monopole clutch. In a Mars gas, it is you are producing these things because you have electrification and you have cavitation, you have the yin-yangs going on, the combination of those three and the dissolved oxygen, which is continually replaced by the production of oxyhydrogen in there, and also the hydrogen is there. You have the hydrogen to produce the etheric particles, the string vortex photons, the black evos. They can then bind to the oxygen that's synthesized, producing this heavy gas. And when that thing burns, the bound to the paramagnetic oxygen gets released, these etheric particles that are bound to the paramagnetic nuclei. You have an abundance of these localized etheric particles, these condensed relic neutrinos, and they produce a ball lightning, and the ball lightning then does the magic the ball lightning does to metals, which we have observed and demonstrated and replicated. So in the case of Matsumoto's disappearing metals, it's the same. In the case of Hutchison effect, it's the same. In the case of Yule Brown, it's the same. In the case of Evie Gray, in the case of you name it, Henry Murray, it does not matter. They are all the same thing. They are all the same thing. And if you understood, that is the big secret. It's true charge separation. It's true charge separation, and it's easiest to do with hydrogen isotopes. Lighter elements like aluminium, you can get funky effects. Okay, so he used aluminium to create these things. So I think at my time in Japan and my time in India with George Eagley, building on his gift to me of starting me in late 2016 on the road with my curiosity of ball lightning, I gave back to him on really detailed that aluminium was a key to this. And little did I know Tesla was there 130 years before me. Okay, so I'm going to look at your comments now. Yeah, you don't want alternating things going on. Cosmic Dave, great to see you. Thanks. Yeah, supernova could splatter us with dirty streams of matter, but I think a lot of it gets captured by both the magnetic and the an elemental shield we have around us. Why is unidirectionally matter when impulses is used to create those phenomena? Unidirectionality is you want to build the charges in the location. You don't want to push and pull and push and pull and push and pull. So you want the toroidal moment and the flow of that all going in one direction. And this is then capturing, as he's saying, like I call the Dyson Airblade, it's forcing more and more and more into the target. Yeah, I've experienced some of these stinging things, but in fact, it was actually when we had a Mars gas on the PTFE, and of course PTFE is not the best conductor in the world. It had this carbon deposit. Obviously, the carbon deposit is like carbon in the PTFE is non-spin. It doesn't get pulled into the exotic vacuum objects that are produced, the string vortex soliton, the structures. It doesn't get pulled into them because it's non-spin. Okay, but the fluorine is, other than hydrogen, other than the proton, 19 fluorine is, I think, the second highest, whatever they call it in terms of spin. It's like really, 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 and that's why I kind of chose it. It was, I kind of felt that fluorine would really work in this situation. And so fluorine gets pulled in and it leaves the carbon, but the carbon can build up the charge, and the charge is. And so when I was touching it, I believe that the carbon has this thing there, and it gave me a tingling on my finger. Now, the tingling may be that these things are emitting these string vortex solitons, and they are carrying fluorine, and the fluorine is going into my skin, and then the structures are blowing up and it's firing out the fluorine atoms. And so fluorine ions are stingy in their own right, and so on. So what you'll see on the video, I can feel it. It's literally stinging. It's tingling. My fingers are tingling. It's a weird sensation, and I had to go and wash it under the tap. And I just recorded the whole thing was recorded in a continuous stream. So it is what it is, and it was irritating. Could you please explain the segmented device which Tesla created pulses? Yeah, it might be the segmentation that Ken Shoulders found. Like if you do one pulse into an Evo generator into another block that has an Evo generator, another block, another block. By segmenting it, you increase the. It's like the relativistic discharge device of Adamenko. He charges up a block of metal. And then he has a plasma discharge channel, and he breaks the plasma discharge channel, and the charge caught in the block of metal, the inductive charge just caught in the block of metal, can only discharge through the target. Now, you've got to imagine that in a stepped chain, like Shoulders described, and basically you have a discharge which has an extremely fast discharge rate, but then that goes into a block which can discharge even faster. So, and the faster you do it, the more etheric particle the ratio of radiant energy particles, of string vortex solitons, or of the relic neutrino condensate clusters, the ratio of those to ordinary matter and electrons increases in the discharge component, and so you get an increase and an increase and an increase and an increase. And so Ken Shoulders described that, you know, it could get very, very powerful in that way. So T.S. Apostolus has said, what does LIGO think it's doing? I think LIGO is a detector of these weapons. It's primarily a detector, and there's more than one LIGO, or more than one of these type of devices, as I understand it. And I think you need a couple or two or three to be able to triangulate where on earth tests of detonations of these weapons would occur. So notionally, the official science, and this is all my personal view, no one's told me this, my belief for a long time is it's a detector for the use of these type of weapons. You can also detect when two black holes are colliding, or when there's other gravitational effects in the environment, but whenever you use these technologies, you're going to get gravitational waves, high frequency gravitational waves, and so you would be able to pick these things up. Bob, may I suggest? So Robert Rackers has said, Bob, may I suggest you study Dan Winter's work on gravity? Best regards. Yeah, I'll take a look at Dan Winter's work. Why not? Yeah. So Mescal said, if we had two dirty streams of matter and combine them, we can transmute in the beam and split it. Maybe, yeah. And I think now that we understand how we create these things and what is actually being created and what it can do, and that we have a wide range of experiments of what they can do, you know, if you had the right pulsation frequency, the right density of ether stream, and the right materials. But to be honest, I think really the ultra experiments and variations thereof, or the Vachayev experiment effectively is producing, it has a constriction, it has a magnetic field to align the charges, in my view. It has a solenoid around it, and that has pulses as well. So the pulses are constricting, but I think the pulses are also aligning the magnetic charges that are synthesized between the discharge point, and they pass dirty contaminated water through it. You'll get the yin yangs forming, the etheric charges, all of the right components going on, and it produces non-radioactive elements from dirty radioactive water, and it actually produces spheres, hollow spheres. And actually, when Sergei Godin went back after the Sochi 2018, he actually sent out, and I've been trying to find these pictures for a long time, this Petri dish where he had these spheres, some of them like hollow spheres that get synthesized in his Vachayev replications, and they were on a glass Petri dish, and you actually saw the strange radiation tracks coming out from these spheres, just like you saw from the spheres in the cavitation fuel from Suhas Ralkar, where I took that image, and then you saw the spheres, and out of one part of the sphere you see these spiraling beams coming out, and so you know these things emit these structures from you know quite a period of time, and probably were transmuting for quite a period of time. Yeah, so Rife and Poiré devices are probably. I certainly Rife was said he was building his technology based on Tesla work. Poiré probably along those lines, and it is all about frequency, isn't it? So Rife was finding frequencies to destroy, for instance, pathogens based on some resonant function in the pathogen, which wasn't killing anything else in your body. You can overdo it because you get the Herx reaction, so you need to be careful not to kill too many bacteria. In the same way that you don't want to have too many antibiotics at the start of a course of antibiotics, because you can get terrible reactions and even die from the guts of bacteria being spilled all over the internal parts of your body. So yeah, everything in moderation, and don't take any risks that you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, Ixander Saya, this is the toroidal moment, in my view, is a way to interact with the Akashic record, and maybe at the right frequencies you are tuning the receiver or focusing the receiver of the brain to access the Akashic record, and that might be where Tesla was you know, able to get better insights and clarity of thought. Yeah, so Mescal is talking about these ether flows as in weather ether research. It is definitely the same uh, spectra of effects. Flux capacitor is definitely something that exists out of this technology. Daniel Foster, this is kind of like Berkeley currents, yeah. And given the fact that I see ordinary matter going one way and electrons are a form of ordinary matter, and the toroidal moment kind of projects out in the opposite direction, although the toroidal moment pulls in the in my view, the dark matter in the opposite direction. The Berkeley currents could be, electron moving in one direction and dark matter moving in the other, and I don't know, so something like that I think is going on. Cosmic Dave, yes, a bagel is, in my view, able to cohere this stuff from the natural environmental flux and focus them, and that's when things get a little bit scary. So Harry says, Bob, I was going to wait until the end, but could you explain the pulse emitter device and capacitor helix? Yeah, I think the pulse emitter is one thing. Not sure about the capacitor helix. I mean, like I say, I have almost no exposure to Tesla technology. There's probably people here that know a lot more about it. I literally came into reading this in so-called my free time on Friday evening, and I read till page 69 up to now. The first bunch of pages are just a waste of time, and I've given you my nearly real-time thoughts on it. Okay, I've gone back so far. What I'll try and do in the next days is I'll look through your comments and see if there's anything I've missed. But please go to remoteview.icu. So Corky said, big Tesla fan, never heard of him doing a Hutch effect in public. Well, apparently he did. But it's one of those things that I think John Hutchison once said, like, if we had a low loader truck and drove around New York and demonstrated material disintegration and levitation and disappearance of material, or translucency of metals, or glowing of metals without heat, people wouldn't even believe it when they were seeing it right in front of their face. They would think you were doing some sort of magic trick. And actually, this is exactly the thing that Geverblis found himself thinking when he saw the so-called electromagnetic phantom. And so why, when you're seeing it physically in front of you. So I imagine that many people, when they were watching these the clear party tricks, but they are just science, demonstrated by Tesla, that they couldn't comprehend that they were real, and they just thought, well, and they probably went away, and it says in the book that because these people weren't equipped to be able to replicate them, they thought that to help justify their own incompetence, or to defend their own incompetence, they would say, like, these things were just some sort of artifact and he was just a showman or whatever, and they weren't really happening. And so, like, he's a poet and he's just making stuff up, and they're trying to hiding their own incompetence. And so I see the same criticisms of John Hutchison, that, he wasn't creating these things that I'm holding in my hand and that clearly have these very anomalous effects going on. He wasn't creating them. He must have been faking it somehow. And even when they're caught on video at a time when you couldn't fake these things digitally. So, we have the video record of these things. Wouldn't it be marvelous if we had the video record of Tesla blowing things up and so-called melting, but actually jellification of metals? Wouldn't it be great if we had those things as a video record of Tesla? But we don't, because we've got it from John Hutchison. So the thing is, it is real, and I believe that we have a fairly clear understanding of this. And not because you can't do it doesn't mean it isn't possible. It just means you're not competent to replicate the effect. But we now know that the secret of Cold War technology is understanding true charge separation and how to focus and resonate with it depending on the material that you are interacting with. Corky, let's take this act to Vegas, Bob. Yeah, why not? So WP for truth. I got mine. Sorry, I'm trying to read you. You've made some comments here. I'm going to go back. So this tech should be able to transmute the rads to electrical work and the process allow transmuted elements be defined by the... Yes, it should. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. But I think it's simpler to do it with just sound in water and choose your mix of starting materials and your frequency and your length of duration. It's like baking a cake. In the case of ultrasonic cavitation, you start off with your ingredients and you bake it for the time you need to produce the outcomes you want. Then you extract the things you want, you remove the impurities, and you rinse and repeat again. Literally, you rinse and repeat again. And so in terms of a science that is demonstrable and repeatable and easy to comprehend, I think this is much easier than... And you're literally working with nature in so many ways. You're just using sound, you're using this wonderful element aluminium, which has these properties that we've identified that are so critical, and you're using water. So you're using a process that's occurring in our bodies likely, it's occurring in plants, it's occurring in hydrothermal vents, it's occurring in water crashing on a shore, it's in rain hitting and in lightning and in water running down a stream and moving through cracks in the earth. So I'm Penn and Teller already took a similar act to Vegas. Wow. I mean, yeah, it's fun to do these things, but I think the important thing is, dealing with Fukushima and turning these into practical technologies that are not weapons, that can benefit humankind. Yeah, there are definitely wizards out there. There's probably people out there, many people in a range of cultures that have known how to do this. They know the recipe, but they don't understand what's going on underneath. And we are in this weird position right now where what happened in experiments spanning a number of years that the MFMP and others have conducted is supported by years and years of military research and other scientists' work without knowing it. And that is underpinned by observations that I was completely unaware of Nikola Tesla. And they are all telling exactly the same story. There's no deviation. The effects you observe are the same effects every time, right? And it just depends on the magnitude. You know, you can see this because you can see it with your naked eye because it's big. You can see this because we've got a scanning electron microscope on it, right? It's the things occur, so there's no doubt that they occur. You know, I kind of like the reason I think you get these spheres with this material coming out is like it's either coming out of the end where the ordinary matter is coming in, and it built up this coherent matter in there, so it could keep piling the thing in. But the entrance to the sphere, the containment sphere, is also the exit. So when the fractal toroidal moment is removed, the material spews out of the area that it went in, if you know what I mean. It went into. And so this is why you see this eruptions from this zone that it went in. Or it might be the opposite way round. The area where the relic neutrino condensates go in, that is the weak point. That is the bit that when the flux of relic neutrino stops going into this fractal toroidal overall cluster zone, then that's maybe where the music stops and it comes out of there. So you could probably answer it by thinking about it in context of normal volcanoes. We don't need to say ether. We can say relic neutrinos. Like, there are people that still don't believe relic neutrinos exist, but there is a whole science going on out there that accepts them, and it's in mainstream science. So we can use relic neutrinos. Like I say, in 2008, the McElrath paper from CERN Theory Group is suggesting that relic neutrinos are the gravity we observe. Their properties explain the gravities that we observe. The standard model says that they represent more matter than all of the solid and luminous matter that we can observe in the universe, and that these can result in inverse beta reactions. So there we go. You have everything on the table, which is in mainstream physics. You don't have to argue this, okay? And there is this thing called the toroidal moment, and there are papers out there which I've identified, and I've shared it. It's easy, and in my Russian conference presentation, that argue that the anapole can be interacted of the stable matter can be interacted with the toroidal moment. And the toroidal moment is a accepted thing that is being investigated actively at the nanoscale for next generation memory technologies and computational processing technologies. It is a real thing. So all of the things that I'm talking about are things that are in the mainstream and actively being deployed in real technologies that work. So we don't have to talk about it in these terms. What I'm saying is that everything that I was reading in this account and interpretation of Tesla's actual observations and work aligns precisely and only with the observations that we've had. I mean, literally, I couldn't see anything in there that wasn't one for one correlated to the physical things that we've been sharing over years, and that then we found there was historical literature supporting them. Shan, I will refer. I've got a lot of data, and I've got some very exciting things referring to beetle lytra and how this can lead to anti-gravity effects. You're on the right track. It's going to be fun when we come to that. I've got a whole package of material that I will share on that, the Grebennikov stuff and so forth. And you're asking, does it scale? It is cumulative. It compounds if you get the environment right. I can't. And another point with Stephen, I kind of had to refer to ether because it's laced the entire document. This entire document is laced with the term ether. And this is the way that Tesla thought about it. I don't think it's a superfluid, gaseous type medium, and a relic neutrino condensate fits the bill. And so there we go. What exactly is the field structure of a relic neutrino? Um, I think it is an anapole, so it can look at some of the papers that I've shared with my Azizi presentation and the Russian presentation. But basically, it has no charge, but I believe it has this anapole moment, which can be interacted with by the toroidal moment. So it can interact with gravity, and I'm saying that gravity is the interactions of toroidal moments. So therefore, it must have the ability to be the structure that has the ability to interact with toroidal moments. Okay, so and that is an anapole. And one of the papers I shared from I think 2013 talks about dark matter having this anapole structure. WP for truth. I'm sorry you're experiencing security issues. I've had some. How shall we put it? Interesting passive aggressive threats since my recent presentations, and I would say that they are from the highest of the highest of the highest of the highest of the highest level. Special executive service level. Hi, Emmett.